Looks like people are coming back. So Anandana, the way it usually works is that the note taker in the group gives us a brief presentation on what happened there. And then we go through all four groups, and then you can respond after each set. And then we say bye-bye. Ram, since you are group one, why don't you start?
Okay, so my group was composed of Anusha, Aparajita, Dhriti, Meera, and Vivek. And we just generally spoke about how we have observed the way in which people huddle or inhabit environment. So Aparajita talked about how typically women, and whether they're homemakers or not, tend to stand when elders are sitting, or they may be in a corner. Often they're waiting for their turn to speak. And even if they're invited to join, they may not. Anusha spoke about meal times and how serving so naturally falls to the women. There might be distinctions made about steel versus plastic tumblers, or timing of who gets to eat first and who eats after. Jyoti spoke about how the kitchen is a women's space as opposed to the hall, and there are these sort of private, the home itself is further subdivided into private and public spaces. And Meera talked about how this is changing, but this is not, but we're not there yet. Even rituals like being made to touch the feet of elders, and how in some cultures the boys get to touch the feet and women actually have to touch the floor. So even in the smallest, even those few inches, like there's a demarcation that's made. Vivek pointed out the kind of segregation that still occurs when filling water from tanks or wells or accessing resources like this. And I was just thinking about how all of us have a personal bubble around us, and how this changes as you go sort of down with power. So men seem to have this large personal space, and it keeps getting smaller and smaller, and as you go towards women and children. And so these were sort of the thoughts that we were having about how these rules organize the way in which people spatially inhabit spaces. In terms of what we censor, and Vivek was thinking of an instance when an old and very distinguished prof unfortunately mistook systems thinking for systematic thinking, and he was just unable to correct him, and pointing out that these hierarchies are, sort of deep. And Dhriti talked about how we often self-censor so much, not just others but ourselves. Anusha and Aparajita spoke about mental health especially. And in the same token, just feelings themselves are not really expressed, especially in the presence of hierarchy. And Aparajita especially spoke about how the pandemic actually caused a lot of grief, but it was not allowed for this grief to be expressed. And Anusha pointed out that maybe the pandemic was actually an opening for the destigmatizing of mental health, but strangely the pandemic almost normalized it, and therefore it was not really possible to talk about it, and sort of made it less important. Meera pointed out that we're becoming very logic driven, and that we actually have this fear of emotions. I was thinking about how, in terms of censorship, bodies in our cultures especially are so heavily censored, and sexuality as well is massively censored. It's just clothing. So, and Meera pointed out that one of her professors spoke about how label mics are such a masculine sort of idea. And lastly, we started talking about what we would like to censor. And so many people chipped in saying they would like to censor their bigoted relatives. And then slowly began to talk about how perhaps we are just interested in censoring judgmental people. I mean, a lack of a certain kind of openness, and especially people who not only do not understand difference, but who force their ideas on others. And I was just thinking that if we wanted to have a sort of authentic encounter with someone, perhaps one of the things to do is to remove people with too much power from the room. And then maybe you have a chance of sort of making a connection. We did not get past this. We ran out of time for the remaining prompts, but that was a quick roundup. Did I miss anything, anybody? Anybody would like to chip in?
Anandra, any response from you?
Yeah, thank you, Ram. That sounds very exciting. And I think the central takeaway that power is coded so deeply in our bodies, and the way we position themselves is so important, because I think that also then translates to very formal and official spaces as well. And trying to sort of break that taboo about emotions is particularly important. And I feel like that's a life skill that coaches should be working on more, which is how do you convey dissent. It's a different matter to be able to speak up, but how do you convey dissent, and what are our mechanisms for doing that? I think those are things which can be a very interesting starting point. So if you're not able to tell a superior at work that you would like to disagree with them, you can always ask them how they disagreed with somebody. And maybe, those are points with which we can start. So I think co-creation really opens up different ways of addressing the main problem. And I think certainly this idea of gender, and particularly how it sort of determines what is urban also. We never count the house as urban or the home as urban. Whereas, internal architecture, not just the internal architecture of the psychology, but the architecture of the home, and the fact that the home is connected to another home and its eyes and ears, basically, uh, that is the urban fabric of life. So I think somewhere talking a little bit about that, and only then will we start asking questions about quality housing. Will we start asking questions about how people who migrated from, say, villages to cities, who have a horizontal economy, you have a little angan where people can play, you have a little, shelter for the animals. It's all horizontal. And the cities force you to stack up and become vertical, right? So your idea of space changes completely. And within that vertical stacking, there is a hierarchy of where women can go or not go. So I think this idea of space and the urban imagination has to take into account things like that. So thank you for, speaking about those. And finally, I would say that, yes, certainly mental health is so important. And it's also important not to let people realize that several people are not qualified to give you the support that you're seeking. So it's also about trying to say that, this doesn't work for me. So like I said, co-creation is also about saying this is not working for me. When do I let go? And when do I choose a different community or build bridges which are different? So those are also hard questions that emerge from it. So thank you everyone.
All right, group 2, Shreya. Shreya, you're muted in case you're trying to speak.
She's unable to unmute, she says.
Huh.
Can somebody do it for her?
Yeah, I just did. Yeah.
Hello. Yeah,
we
I
can
hope
hear
you all
you.
can. Yeah, great. Okay. In group number 2, Ranjit, Sucheta, me, Prasann, and Kaustubh, we just decided to address these questions in the context of the traffic problem that we had all discussed the last time. And for example, with spatial problems or the spatial lens. Sorry, just give me 1 second. Yeah, hi, I'm sorry. So, yeah, so with the spatial lens on how we think co-creation would happen for a traffic problem in, let's say, Bangalore, we thought that that maybe having something, some sort of a digital interface might help in bridging the power dynamics, the gaps that you observe in a physical environment very easily, and a digital app can also be a good tool for data collection and for getting the kind of qualitative or quantitative inputs that you might require from people to co-create on such an exercise, and also considering the number of stakeholders that would probably be involved in this exercise. So we thought that from a spatial lens, maybe moving on to a to a virtual space rather than sticking to a physical space might be better. But then moving on to the, like, just connecting the third question with this, which is about platforms and about the mediums that we choose, we thought that having a mix of physical and virtual would probably be necessary here, considering that not all the stakeholders who you want to be a part of this exercise will have access to virtual or digital devices like a phone, for example. So it would become very important to then have these discussions face to face with people who might not have that kind of access. And also to get a sense, we also realize that there's a huge difference between physical spaces and virtual spaces. In a physical space, you like, there are a lot of things that you realize from a face-to-face interaction that you might not be able to realize through a virtual call or a phone call. So so we thought that maybe having that kind of a mix would be better in this case. Maybe also, like, going ahead and furthering that to, for example, depending upon the kind of stakeholders that we're engaging with. So for some, we might go ahead and do a virtual call with, for example, the corporates or the governments. But for people who are mainly affected by the construction of roads, or who are affected by the traffic problem, maybe it'll be better to just go and speak with them directly. So that was how we linked it. The second question, which was about the emotional aspect and what we usually censor, this was a little tricky one, but we realized that usually in cases like this, especially where a lot of stakeholders are involved, and when it's a public problem, it's usually the marginalized whose voices and whose opinions get censored, or they never even come up uh, to the larger audience. And so we thought that maybe those who are probably relocated because of the construction of the roads, or who are actually directly impacted by the traffic problem, maybe those are the people whose voices and opinions are not heard and not accounted for at all times. So maybe those will be the opinions that we would like to consider. Um, in the last question, which was about diversity and and the kind of stakeholders that we would like to engage with, we thought that because this was linked to the last session, the all the people that we had focused on in the last session, Rahul, the old lady, sorry, the old man and the domestic help lady, the small vendors, beggars on streets, beggars on traffic lights whose livelihoods is dependent on traffic lights, rickshaw drivers, all of these people, maybe getting their inputs would be very essential, because they are the actual consumers or the users of the transportation network that we have. Plus, it would also be good to probably include those I mean, of course, these people will also disagree to some extent, but for example, persons with disability who for whom this transportation network might or might not be the most suitable network at all. Corporates who might say that I would like the road to be at some place versus some other place. And similarly, government, how does the government interact and come to a conclusion on all of this? I think those were the wide variety of stakeholders that we wanted to incorporate. Um, um, I would also like to ask other people from the group if there was anything that I missed.
They seem satisfied. Thank you, Shreya. Thank you. Yeah. So, you know, as I was listening to you guys, it's interesting to me that you were able to sort of tether it to the idea of decongestion and making roads accessible. I think co-creation, when it is mapped to a particular problem metrics, makes it even more interesting. And I realized that participation is something that you are thinking of. And so I would also say that thinking of a participation gap is possibly an interesting way to go about it, because then all the diverse stakeholders that you're thinking of uh, can be sought out, because then you're not looking at, oh, I need this person to be present or give their opinion at all costs, but you're actually saying what are the costs of involving this person so that they can participate and co-create. And I remember looking at a white paper on an app about road safety. So this idea of how to cross a road, which we take for granted, because many of us are not crossing roads. A lot of us are privileged and sitting in vehicles, whether they're cell phoned or whether they're hired or in public transport. Very few of us are crossing the road, and it's a certain section of society that is crossing busy junctions. And who is to talk to them about road safety? And so they were looking at particularly sections which are outside of the urban space, where crossing the road was leading to a lot of deaths. And the app kept failing because people were not able to identify with it. And then they were finally asked, you understand that you're going to get hurt, you understand this project is helpful, but why won't you work with the app? And they said that, you've made the roads yellow, and there are no yellow roads. It's such a simple UI UX switch, which is to show a road as road, which is asphalt and black and gray, but not yellow. But this idea of what we perceive as reality and what we perceive as commonsensical and who can afford the pleasures of abstraction also become important. So when you communicate to them that they need to be involved, what is the language that you are using to involve them, whether it's visual or otherwise, becomes really interesting. And I just leave last comment, which is to say that I have a very dear friend, and she was India's first visually impaired Supreme Court advocate. Her name is Anjali Arora. And she tells me that, you don't have to design something for people who are visually impaired. Design for a person, and I will automatically be included. And her favorite example is of trees overhanging on sidewalks. And she says, you can see, but you still have to duck your neck, and it might still pierce your eye and hurt you. It will definitely hurt me. So think of yourself and trim that tree, and I'm automatically taken care of. So somewhere we also need to not be on high horses when we think of the other, but really say that, how can I be human centered in a way which is more flat? Yeah. Thank you.
All right, we got
Thank you
group
so
3.
much.
Thank you.
We got group 3, but I don't know who is the note taker there. So whoever it is, please chip in.
Yeah, hi, Vikram here. I was a note taker. So the team has Stuti, Neeta, and Archana. So we spoke about the choice of platform and the limitations. What came out was talking to clients or end users or beneficiaries and stakeholders, sitting with them, planning with them, and then co-create the program with them and implementing it is something that came out very strongly across all of us. In terms of how feedback is taken from stakeholders, it was about observing, using an assessment framework, collating the data, sharing the data, and working on the choices that the people make out of a limited set of choices, working on it, piloting it, and rolling it out. That was one. How do we invite people to also write or co-author the questions was the question, to which the response was, it depends on the communities we are working with. We also teach them how to use technologies such as Zoom app and Google Meets and things like that. To the question, so our session was primarily in a question answer kind of a mode. So that's how I'm sort of reading this. In the facilitation model, can anything be improved was the question, to which one suggestion that came out was that of a suggestion box, but then that also would be only applicable for folks who are literate, right? So hence verbal communication would become more important there. Then the emphasis on dignified interpersonal communication, creating a safe space for interaction to take place. That is something that came up. And the fact that if there's a flat organization, then the communication can be much smoother, much streamlined. That was one thing. One innovative thing that came up was about private school kids writing letters to government school kids. While co-creating with larger partners, the problem statement gets posed, and then partners are invited for a response, following which co-creation workshops are done, and over an iterative process, a program takes shape. While meeting communities in the field, people would try and speak in a local language. However, again, over there, the point was about the dialect that one chooses to use could create a hierarchy in itself. And only one piece came up, which was about whom would one exclude. In this particular case, what came out was while one is preparing or co-creating the program, a government stakeholder would not be called into the room. However, post the event, it is taken to the government in terms of taking inputs and things like that. And keeping in mind the dignity and I put quotes around the word deficiencies of the method used and the and how the other side is engaging with the method used. So that is something that came. To the question on one thing that we would all like to share about what we did today in terms of how we will do something differently. One thing came about was about feedback forms. Can they be physical letters? Can we have more play in terms of what we do? Be it sticking post-its, writing on postcards, putting up posters, and using that as a medium to communicate ideas and thoughts. And also incorporating input from clients, the people for whom we supposedly design our programs. So my group, Stuti, Neeta, Archana, if I missed something, please do add.
Looks like everybody is happy.
Thank you, Vikram. And I was privy to the conversation, and it was very exciting because everybody is working so closely with the communities, and some aspects of co-creation already exist. Everybody realized. And this idea of anonymizing and therefore making comfortable the ability to talk back was something that we revisited a few times in the conversation. And I was just proposing that one could use art and creative methods in the process of the workshop, not as tokenism, but just as ways in which you can rethink how we talk. And I thought what was fascinating to me was everybody's discomfort with the term that they want to use for the communities that they work with. So stakeholder, client, end user, that in itself is very, very important to me because it shows that you realize that there is a step that they can come closer. And it would be interesting to even just ask them what you would like to be called. I remember when I was working with a developer and he said, how would you explain what I do? I'm a hacker to the domestic workers and homemakers in India. And I thought for a long time, and then I said, I'll call you a Jugadu. And we got into conversations about what is Jugaad and is it a truly Indian thing or is it something that everybody else does too? And so when I speak to the homemakers and domestic workers, they are Jugadus. And it's a self-chosen term, a term that came out of discussion. And I'm not sure if the government will give you grants if you call people that, but internally you can come up with ways in which they would like to be called. Yeah. But thank you, and all the best for all the lovely work you're doing.
Excellent. So now we have group 4 and Srichand.
Hi, I think we had a little bit of a challenge as to how to progress on the 4 questions. So I'll start with what we've kind of discussed. We had a few things that we thought of. Farmers in near NCR, rock climbers, and we ended up picking up Safai Karmcharis, Paura Karmika workers from Bangalore experience, at least for a few of us. I talked about how even though they're in the city, they're largely invisible. People don't interact with them. Um, they're like streetlights. Um, they're just there, but the city moves around them, and they either they don't get tools and any kind of entitlements that they are entitled to. And I think Prakash was then talking about how the contractor gets the biggest say in it in terms of what they get, what they don't get. And a place to situate this would be in the mornings or in the breaks, where they all gather before they start their day, which is usually at 5 o'clock in the municipal areas, in the wards they start. Eunice was talking about how all of these have allotted wards and spaces where they have to operate out of, and that is where they discharge their duties. Alpana was saying that all of them lack any kind of a security that can come from having a job. So it's financial, emotional, and medical insecurity that they have. Alok, I think he added something else. I missed it out here. He said they're aware of Paurukarmikas are aware of their injustices, but they don't have as much agency to act on it. And I was talking about how if we were to interview or if we were to co-create, it would make sense to humanize them, where we do conversations with the family, because usually we see them in like just these dark gray coats, and then they disappear as the sun goes down. Prakash was saying that you are doing this as an individual and not as a family. Then why would you expect the same from them? You should be they should be able to represent themselves as their from their work, and not because they have a family. Eunice was saying maybe if we were to look at look at a platform or a space where they can work, that would be some form of unions where they can represent their interests and their rights. On the medium, Prakash and Alok said food is a good way to break barriers. We've not been able to talk a little more. We ran out of time. But he did say he's tried that out in some experiment. And Alpana said maybe we should look at caste, because that definitely plays a role in terms of what's stopping them from becoming a domestic worker to start doing house help work, right? So then I think Brahmins came. It didn't go to anything else beyond it, and we ran out of time. So food as a medium and rights unions, those kind of things is where we kind of drew. Yeah.
Nice.
And diversity, we thought we'll also involve, I think it's, if you scroll down, I think we just have 3 more words there. Contractors, subcontractors, maybe are also people we need to engage, because they're essentially between Safai Karmacharis and the municipalities. And yeah, they kind of have a say in what finances are given to the workers in terms of tools, or in terms of their pay, in terms of their recognition that they're a permanent worker.
Right.
I think I missed out 1 point from Prakash and 1 point from Alok. If you can add, okay.
Okay, they've given you the green signal.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. I think you're brought in a very important urban reality, which is that those who did not get a day's rest and who make the city both palatable and visually acceptable are a whole host of these informal workers. I really do feel that the question of individual versus the individual and their family is an important one, partly because, of course, a lot of these jobs are relegated in terms of certain caste dynamics. Some of them are also hereditary. They pass on from one individual to another. And what is it that prevents people from breaking those conditions? And so I wouldn't even play up the binary of Dalit versus Brahmin here. I would even play up the binary. I would sort of diversify it to say that there are other players in the system as well. And, you know, like by sort of talking about only that usual binary, we don't sort of make the others who are culpable responsible. So we should really look at the caste system on its whole. We certainly should look at the, you know, factors of privilege that come into play. And co-creating, I think, with caste in the room is so important, because people should be able to express whatever their learnings are and whatever their disagreements are safely. I find food being a platform extremely exciting. And let me tell you that that's the only way forward, I think, by breaking bread, as the Westerners call it. But, you know, in our cases, it's the chutneys and the pickles and the chai. That 1 cup of chai where they add extra sugar, knowing fully well that they probably will not be able to now put sugar for anybody in the entire week, but you get that, you know, milky tea, sweet tea. That I think is symbolic, at least for me, of interactions which are possible. And I think all of these are very important. In terms of co-creating, it's also the question of what is their vernacular? How do they want to be represented? You know, and the idea is to say that we'd like to invite you, but the question is, where do they want to be invited? Will you be able to go, and also what happens to, say, rack pickers, who are yet another community within this community, who will not even have markers of being employed or permanent, etc. So really, I think when we are talking about invisible labor, you can also see who is invisibilized by the people you invisibilize, and then, you know, see how to sort of bring more stakeholders that way as well into the picture. So thank you very much. I think these are important aspects, and the platform can be as simple as food, but there are days when even a square meal is not possible. So then I think just traveling to them rather than inviting them to us can make a lot of difference. And pick your own garbage, guys. Don't toss it out of a moving car. Clean up after picnics. Yeah, do that. Yeah, thank you.
Alrighty. Thank you, Anandana, for this lovely presentation and the questions and the feedback. And of course, thanks to all the participants here. So this was actually the last, you could say, learning session. The next 2 sessions are going to be, we're going to go right into co-creation and co-imagination. So Anandana has brought us to the brink of the abyss.
Well,
so
happy time. It's a fun field.
Yeah. So, all right. So thank you, everyone. We'll be back in a week's time. And
thank you,
thanks to Anandana.
Thank you all. Bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.